Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Once again, as we welcome you to the airwaves of Assalam Media, and tonight being part two of In Conversation with myself, Inayat Wadi. Now, we've seen the genocide in Gaza still continuing despite recent world events, and we know one of the biggest talking points at this point in time is the FIFA 2026 World Cup. And while the world remains engrossed in this showpiece in the United States of America, in Canada, in Mexico, and also at the same time, another major event that has been doing the rounds has been the funeral, the 5-day funeral of Ayatollah Khamenei out in Iran. But while all of this is playing out, once again, we see on the just a few days ago, the 1,000 days of the crisis in Gaza being commemorated, and we've seen just so much in terms of what has been taking place in Gaza in these 1,000 years and where we are at this point in time. And this is the reason that we found it absolutely necessary to discuss this topic, because it's something that is somewhat put on the back burner. But while the crisis still continues, while the hunger still continues, while the poverty, while the death, the destruction, while the suffering still continues, and this is the reason why we are talking with my guest tonight. We are joined by people who are no strangers to Salam Media, to this show in particular, Professor Jeff Halper out of Jerusalem. We have got Osama Nazzal, journalist out of the West Bank, and also we'll be joined by Lina Abojarade, who is out in Jordan. So as we await my guests on a screen right now, both Professor Jeff and Osama Nazzal, I see both of you on screen already. Assalamu alaikum to both of you and welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us.
Yes, Osama, I'd like to actually begin with you and just to talk about, where we are at this point in time. Clearly, 1,000 days, a milestone, some would call it, but also a milestone that actually defines how horrific this experience has been through the genocide that has unfolded in Gaza. So just by way of an introduction, just to understand what this 1,000 days have actually meant for the people of Gaza, for the people of Palestine, for the people of the free world, for humanitarians right across the entire world.
Yeah, the problem with the 1,000 days of genocide and murder and catastrophe, the problem is that no end. It's still continuing as the Israeli occupation government is still bombarding Gaza, killing Palestinians every day, destroying what remained of housing units or facilities, and it is still imposing its siege and does not allow the access of medical supplies or humanitarian aid. And if it allows, it just like a drop in the ocean, not more than that. And in the West Bank, Israel is escalating its aggression on the Palestinian citizens by unleashing the Israeli settlers militias who are attacking Palestinian villages day and night. They are attacking the Palestinian farming and shepherd communities. They beat the citizens, they steal the livestock, they chop and uproot the trees, they dissect the roads. So the map is really a map of pessimism, frustration, disappointment, as if it is the fate of the Palestinian people in the occupied Palestinian territories to keep suffering and facing the worst ever living conditions.
Well, certainly, and I think let's just bring Professor Jeff Halper in as well. Prof. Jeff, just your thoughts as well.
Well, in some ways, I guess the people of Gaza and the people of Palestine in general, are like the other colonized peoples of the world, the other peoples that are oppressed. They're dispensable. They're only important. I mean, the whole Palestinian issue only became important when it somehow disrupted life in the global north. You know, when it got to a point where there was, you know, Israel, that's a respected part of the global north, was attacked. You had the whole specter of terrorism, of course, that's scaring Europe and the United States and the other global north countries. And, you know, the military, the destabilization, you know, the Arab world wants stability in the region so it can develop economically. It wants the Middle East to be the hub of the world economically and so on. So in a way, you know, everything is kind of going on, and the Palestinians become disruptors. That's what their resistance really is for the wider world. And so as when they could actually disrupt, I mean, the attack on October 7th, let's not forget, stopped the whole normalization process in its tracks. Saudi Arabia was about to sign, Netanyahu 2 weeks before, in the United Nations, in the General Assembly, held up a map and said we're on the cusp of a new Middle East because Saudi Arabia is about to sign the Abraham Accords. And that was stopped, that whole process, by the Hamas attack. So it had a really important effect in terms of processes going on in the region that affected the bigger powers, the Arab states, the United States, Europe, BRICS to some degree. And for that reason, the Palestinian issue, I think, became really central. And of course, Israel's genocide, I mean, was something that few people had ever experienced on TV. You have it in the Sudan, but it's kind of an invisible genocide. Here it was visible, and that shocked everyone. But I think what happened was, you know, once the disruption passed, Gaza was destroyed, it's not really a disruptive influence anymore, either Hamas or Gaza or the Palestinian issue and so on. The world turned to other things. In the Middle East, of course, Iran and Hezbollah and so on. But I think that, you know, on the one hand, the Palestinians are I think, one of the central issues in the world for the peoples of the world. But for governments, they're really dispensable. They're not important and as long as they don't disrupt anymore, we kind of forget about them. So I think somehow the job of civil society, of all of us, is to keep the Palestinians at the center of attention. We have to monitor. We can't allow a normalization process to go on without the Palestinians, because that's exactly where Israel is going, towards a normalization with the Arab world without the Palestinians. And the Palestinians, as Osama said, get locked into little Bantustans in an apartheid state forever. And so I think this is maybe a lesson of Gaza, and that is maybe we should ask ourselves, how can we continue to disrupt the international system with the Palestinian issue in order to keep that issue at the center of attention?
Yes, thank you for that, Prof. Jeff. Osama, I think what Prof. Jeff is saying and what he alludes to in terms of disrupting the international system, and the point that I had made right at the beginning in my introduction is Gaza has been overshadowed by some of these developments, and whether we're looking at it in the form of entertainment, in the form of the World Cup, the FIFA World Cup that is taking place right now, or even all the developments in the last few months in Iran as well. And just to understand, you know, why this has happened, does Palestine matter? Is Gaza still on the agenda or at the top of the agenda? Because when we look at what has happened in the 1,000 days, so much has happened in terms of even minimum targets that have not been made. And yeah, we're talking about aid going into Gaza. There were days where no aid at all, where we're talking about out of the 1,000 days, 142 days in which no aid at all was allowed into Gaza. And that alone should give us a wake-up call.
Yeah, of course, talking about the 1,000 days of genocide is important, but it is also important to clarify that the suffering of the Palestinians in Gaza or the occupied territory did not start 1,000 days ago, but it started about 77, 78 years ago, when they were forced out of their villages and their homes, and when they were, turned from a nation, from a people who have their history, their culture, their land, their plantation, and turned into refugees, depending on the United Nations and on the world donations. Concerning whether Gaza is still on the agenda, without any doubt, and we see how the World Cup is giving the peoples around the world an idea about Gaza. When we see the fans and the players and the referees waving the Palestinian flag, calling for justice for Palestine. This is important, really, that the World Cup has become like a hub for raising awareness about the Palestinian cause and about the catastrophe of Gaza. But as a Palestinian citizen, this is not enough, really, for me, because if the price for that was the blood of the Palestinian children and the Palestinian women and the Palestinian men, then that is futile. What the Palestinians want is real action, really, real response from the world in order to force Israel to stop spilling the blood of the Palestinian children, and at the same time to address the Palestinian cause seriously and start a path toward the end of this war and of this colonial settlement regime, and to give the people the right to exercise their life just like other free people on this planet.
Shukran for that, Osama. Prof. Jeff, just looking at it from a global perspective and also looking at it from an Israeli perspective as well, where we've seen the failure in legal obligations to protect the people of Palestine, to protect, to stop this ongoing genocide, which we know at this point in time, is still taking place, but also in terms of holding the perpetrators accountable. And since South Africa had taken the matter to the ICJ, and we've already seen, although a ceasefire deal officially that entered on the 10th of October 2025 under the so-called Trump peace plan. But at this point in time, whether we're talking of international institutions, whether we're talking of the Israeli government, whether we're talking of who is involved and those that have supported this genocide, the perpetrators, everything remains ineffective in practice.
Well, that's right. I mean, the international system is not designed to promote the rights of the oppressed, to say the least. And the problem with international law, of course, I mean, there's a wonderful body of international law. And in fact, if international law had been the basis of even negotiations, even in Oslo, the Palestinians would have had some leverage. Part of the leverage they have is that everything Israel is doing, every single act, every day, is illegal in international law, especially the Fourth Geneva Convention that protects vulnerable peoples living under occupation. An occupying power is not allowed to demolish their homes, to settle their lands, to take their lands, to harm them economically, to prevent their freedom of movement, to build highways and infrastructure in occupied territories in order to annex them, to annex the territories, certainly, to apply their law, the occupiers' law in the occupied territory. Everything, every single day that Israel does is illegal. You can check it off in the Fourth Geneva Convention and many other international conventions. And then mechanisms exist for holding the perpetrators accountable, like Israel. For example, in the Fourth Geneva Convention, there's a tribunal that can be called by the high contracting parties to be held in Geneva. Switzerland is a custodian of the Fourth Geneva Convention, and that tribunal of the governments that have signed on the Fourth Geneva Convention can hold Israel accountable for all the violations and sanction Israel. But that's where it ends, because, first of all, no government is going to call a tribunal. It's never really been done. It's been done twice, but immediately dismissed. So there's never been a tribunal. And of course, every time Israel's been brought up before a court, like the International Court of Justice or the International Criminal Court or other courts, and sanctions are possible. Of course, all the enforcement of international law goes through the Security Council, and so it can be vetoed by the United States and other countries. So basically, there's no enforcement. So the Palestinians are completely defenseless, and the only way out, in my view, for the Palestinians is political struggle. I think Palestine has reached the level of the anti-apartheid struggle of your days. I think it's really mobilized and galvanized the international society. What is missing, however, is what you had in South Africa. You had an end game. People knew why we were boycotting apartheid South Africa. One person, one vote. Here in Palestine, the problem is that the Palestinians have not decided on an end game. If you ask the Palestinian Authority, it's 2 states, which is ridiculous, of course. And the Palestinian Authority as a collaborationist regime. Imagine the de Klerk government taking over the ANC. Mandela working for de Klerk. That's what you really have today in Palestine. So first we have to liberate the Palestinian Authority. And then I think with that kind of a local leadership, allowing the Palestinians to come together politically and really talk about their future and what they want and where they're going and how to organize and how to mobilize internationally, I believe that'd be as powerful a movement as you had in South Africa. What's holding everything down right now is not only the complicity of all the governments that support Israel, it's also the complicity of the Palestinian Authority that has a chokehold on the Palestinian people itself. And I think we have to break that. And then the Palestinians have to come together with the support of anti-colonial Israelis like me and all of the people around the world that support them to come together behind an organization and a political program. I think the only answer is political organization, and not human rights and not international law. And as much as the protests and everything are important, BDS is important because it keeps Palestine on the map. The only way the Palestinians will break through to liberation is by an effective political movement that right now is being suppressed, not only by Israel, but also certainly by the Palestinian Authority. I have to say the truth.
Well, thank you, Prof. And I'd just like Osama to actually comment on what you've had to say, Professor Jeff, with regards to the Palestinian Authority. And Osama, I think, obviously 1,000 days later, we find that 90% of Gaza has been destroyed. 80% of the territory of the Gaza Strip is in the control of Israel. Just what more can Palestinians do? What more can the Palestinian Authority do? Does it have the capacity to reform itself, to do anything?
Really, the barbaric techniques and the lethal force that the Israeli occupation is employing against the Palestinians is unprecedented. And I don't think that it's easy for someone who is not living in Palestine to imagine that, because the Israeli forces today never hesitate to shoot, to kill any Palestinian person, any Palestinian child. And just 3 days ago, the Israeli soldiers manning a checkpoint between Ramallah city and its villages did not allow a Palestinian family to move their 9-month-old baby to the hospital of Ramallah, and they kept them waiting on the checkpoint until that baby died. Before the eyes of the Israeli soldiers, of course. The Israeli forces shoot the Palestinians today and keep them bleeding down the street until they make sure that they are dead. And after that, they allow the ambulance to come and pick them. Look what happened in Gaza, for example. We are talking about 73,000 people killed, and most of them are children and women. The number of the Palestinian children who are suffering permanent or lifelong disabilities is in tens of thousands. The people who lost their hearing sense, people are living with hearing impairment. There are over 30 to 40,000 people. And all this catastrophic situation is still not enough to convince Israel that enough is enough, and it's continuing uh, bombarding people, destroying the infrastructure, eliminating the features of life, whether in Gaza or in the West Bank. So when you ask me what the Palestinians can do, really this is a very difficult question, as I feel that the Palestinians are in the bottleneck now because Gaza has been decimated. The situation in the West Bank is not much better, really, because the people are living in Bantustans. And at the entrance of each village or city, there is an iron gate installed by the Israeli forces. One settler can attack Palestinians, kill, steal, take over the land because they practice such crimes under the auspices and support of the Israeli government. And if a Palestinian tries to defend himself or herself, even by a word, against these settlers, the Israeli army come and abduct this Palestinian on the charge of an attempt of harming these settlers. So the situation is very difficult and very complicated. And I feel that the Palestinians have very little to do but to keep their resilience and their steadfastness and to hold on to their land and not to choose really to leave Palestine.
Well, definitely, Osama. And also, I think, Prof. Jeff, just looking at it from an Israeli perspective, it is business as usual. We see the billions that are still flowing between many of Israel's trading partners and Israel as well, despite the genocide that has unfolded as well. But also in terms of the ceasefire framework that was actually meant to end the conflict 6 months later, since this body was established, and I'm referring to the US created Board of Peace, which was established in January. It was meant to oversee the ceasefire, to move towards reconstruction under what was called a three-phase plan. At that point in time, it was endorsed by the United Nations Security Council. But again, what has happened is we've seen this catastrophic failure to secure compliance on the part of Israel. And instead of seeing even a gradual withdrawal plan that was talked about at that point in time, we've just seen expansion upon expansion, whether we're talking about the West Bank or we're talking about Gaza, where we've seen to the extent it's expanded so much control in Gaza that only 1/3 of the 8 trucks that it committed to are allowed to enter Gaza on a daily basis.
Well, that's right. And I go back to my point that the ceasefire, made sense. The whole pressure for a ceasefire made sense when Gaza was a disruptive factor in the region and maybe internationally as well. But once, once the Palestinians, in a sense, were pacified, putting this in the framework of settler colonialism, the colonists, the Zionists, want to pacify the Palestinians in order to normalize. They have to break the resistance. Well, Israel, and I think the United States, felt that the resistance of the Hamas was broken in Gaza. And so the ceasefire was kind of a formal kind of an end to things, but de facto it had already ended. And I think the problem was then that Trump, not only Trump, but the world lost interest in Gaza. Because again, once it lost its disruptive influence, the actual lives of the Palestinians and the suffering that Osama, described so well in the West Bank and not only in Gaza, really doesn't mean anything. It's not human life. That's the problem that really means anything to these governments and to the powers that be. And basically what you had in Gaza was a complete almost elimination of the Palestinians. In other words, the Trump administration, together with Israel, are still looking for ways to move the people out of Gaza. Not only don't they care about the people there that are dying, but the more that die, in a sense, the better, because they both want to thin out, if I can put it in this cruel way, the Palestinian population. And there's still negotiations. It's quiet. There's still negotiations with such places like South Sudan and Indonesia and Malaysia and Somaliland even, to take Palestinians. Israel would like to get them out of the Gaza Strip, and there is no opposition to that. Not inside Israel, and not in the Trump administration, and nowhere in the international community are people really monitoring that. So that what you're really going to have in Gaza, what really interests, and this has to do again with the priorities of the international community, is a corporate colonization, takeover of Gaza. Jared Kushner wants to do there what he's trying to do in Albania. Come in and what's the plan for Gaza? It has nothing to do with Palestinians. Palestinians are not the decision makers. They're only the technocrats, right? The whole Board of Peace has no Palestinian whatsoever in it. The plans that Jared Kushner want to impose on Gaza, turning it into this Riviera tourist resort. You know, if you look at the plan, there's blocks of tourist hotels and restaurants and everything along the seashore, but they're blocks that are separated. And why are they separated? So that Israeli tanks can come in at any time. So even as this corporate takeover and development, so-called, of Gaza is taking place for the profit of Jared Kushner, it has nothing to do with Palestinians, it's still made in a way that Israel has security control and can take it over anytime. And where are the Palestinians? If they're not in southern Sudan, they're in the back of the Gaza Strip, along kind of the border with Israel, in who knows what, shanty towns, little huts. I don't know what but basically they're becoming a service population for a tourist industry run by the United States, and Israel keeps its security control. So in all of this, with these big economic and military and regional interests in mind, who cares about the Palestinians? And that really, I'm putting this in a cruel way, because this has to be at the center of attention. The Palestinian people and their well-being, but also their rights, and where are we going politically? So, I understand what Osama is saying, and I feel, I'm not ignoring the suffering, obviously, of the Palestinians. On the contrary, I'm trying to keep that center. But at the same time, political analysis, how to resolve this is cold and calculating. And you have to sometimes say things like the world just doesn't care about Palestinians, in order to say, okay, well, then what is our strategy for supporting the Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank?
Well, thank you, Prof. Osama, Prof says, who cares about the Palestinians? But the reality is the cry of the Palestinians is a cry for global action, a cry that has been made over and over again to the international community, to the UN bodies. We've seen even statements made even to the Muslim world, to the unified Arab countries, and also Islamic intervention to rescue the Gaza Strip, to talk about a comprehensive reconstruction blueprint, and also at the same time looking at the Palestinians themselves, because what we are seeing is intensified resistance, calling for national unity. All of that has actually been taking place, and it's been taking place over a period of time. And one actually needs to emphasize that, again, it is not about Trump, and it is not about his peace plan, because Palestinians will reject any external guardianship over the future of Palestine or also over the future of the Gaza Strip. What more? What more can be done from a Palestinian perspective, but also at the same time looking at a world that was a few months ago protesting in almost every major city in the world, coming out in their hundreds of thousands, putting pressure on their governments. We see all of that for now starting to lose momentum, or it has actually lost total momentum. We don't see the visuals, we don't see the outrage, we don't see the protests like we've been seeing early on in the genocide.
Yeah, I agree with you, but you know that the momentum of the international solidarity and the demonstrations that we saw in the international capitals, including London, Washington, and many international capitals, uh, they get their momentum when they saw the Israeli massacres and the Israeli pogroms. But they go down when these pogroms and these massacres get reduced or get minimized. But this doesn't mean that the public opinion and the international activists lose the spirit of supporting the Palestinians in their struggle for justice and for freedom. And we all see the pressure that, for example, Palestine Action and other solidarity movements are placed under by their respective governments, which means that Palestine is still in the hearts and the minds of these people. But is the public opinion change, and is the international solidarity at the public level is enough to stop the Israeli genocide and to end the Israeli occupation? What is demanded really is a clear position from the Arab world, from the Muslim world, with the support of the international solidarity and all the great voices that we hear, whether from London or in New York or Madrid, from any international capital, in order to pressure the American administration, the only administration that has leverage to influence Israel and press Israel to stop its genocide and its crimes, and of course start a real process to end its occupation for the occupied Palestinian territories, regardless of the solution that we think of, whether the two-state solution or the one-state solution. As a Palestinian, I don't care about that. What I care about is that justice for every Palestinian citizen, whether this justice comes through the two-state solution or the one-state solution.
Yes, Osama. I see Lina Abojarade is joining us out of Jordan. Lina, assalamu alaikum and welcome.
Wa alaikum assalam. Thank you for having me with the esteemed guests.
Yes, Lina, I think let's just go straight into, where you are coming from. Now, obviously, we've had many a discussion in the last 1,000 days since this genocide has actually started. And also, you've been at many global events, global when you look at when you came here to South Africa as well, in terms of the global movement for Palestine, in terms of finding ways forward and looking at Palestine, where we are at this point in time, and what needs to be done as far as Palestine is concerned. Now, you've reflected a lot of that in what you've written. You've reflected a lot of it in your art as well, which we follow very, very closely. And this brings about the harsh and the stark reality of what this 1,000 days have meant. And Osama said that this is not only about 1,000 days. We're going back to well over 7 decades in terms of what is happening to the people of Palestine. But just while the world is commemorating or looking at a milestone of 1,000 days, and let's just focus on these 1,000 days in particular. What has this actually meant for you, for someone like yourself, Lina?
I definitely agree with our guest that for me personally, I've been drawing for Palestine since I was a teenager, so for over 15 years. So it's definitely not been 1,000 years of me following the cases of the murdered children in Gaza. Let's not forget that before October 7th, Israel was killing over a child a day in the West Bank and Gaza. So this is something that has been a daily occurrence in my life for over a decade. And there are many activists like myself who, Palestine is really their life. And it's our mission just to, highlight and showcase this injustice. And so even if the trends die down, even if, this momentum dies down, we will continue to do the work that we can in our respective fields in order to achieve a free Palestine. And that's why I'm not worried the fact that, the momentum has died. So many people are doing great work and they're continuing the work of awakening people, of prosecuting criminals. Like the Foundation of Hind Rajab is continuously prosecuting the Israeli war criminals, and they're doing great work with that. Artists, professors, so many people doing things in their respective fields. And there's a saying that says that history moves very slowly until it moves very fast. And I feel like the awakening and the global shift in mindset that has happened in the past 2 years is something that we're not going to, go backward from. We're just going to move forward from this. And the world has really awakened to not just the fact that there's cruel injustice and really a cruel value set of how international law is applied to some and not all. And even within FIFA, what's happening with FIFA now, people are waking up to the idea that this is a very corrupt system that favors certain people above others. And we've seen how, the Middle Eastern and African teams time and time again are treated completely unfairly. And there's a complete bias to the system that favors one over the other. And people are starting to wake up to that. And I think that's really great. And this is something that will help our Palestinian cause. And it's not just about Palestine. It's this entire world order that, continues to keep people oppressed. And so, Salah ad-Din, he liberated Jerusalem after 88 years. It's been 78 years since the Nakba. And I'm completely hopeful that very near, as I said, things can catapult really quickly. My hope in God is very strong that things are happening in parallel and that, the end of Israel is very near.
Shukran for that, Lina, Prof. Jeff. I see we do have about 12 minutes to go. It's a pity you joined us a bit late, Lina, because I know we would have loved to engage you a lot more, but I suppose, there are circumstances. But Prof, I think the most critical issue here is we know that, as far as Israel is concerned, and you've been a critic of the ultra-right government in Israel for a very, very long time as well. But it's also about the power play that is taking place in Israel. We've seen what had happened, with Benjamin Netanyahu. There was, to an extent, there was a fallout as well with regards to when the attacks on Iran had actually started with the ultra-right, with the likes of Ben Gvir, Smotrich as well. And just looking at the political landscape of Israel at this point in time, and central, obviously, to the 1,000 days of the genocide that was perpetrated in Gaza. What are some of your thoughts in terms of the political landscape, and also at the same time in terms of Israel society in these last 1,000 days?
I heard from Osama. I think he had to leave maybe, but there's a difference. A very important difference in our emphases. I mean, I'm an Israeli Jew, an anti-Zionist Israeli Jew, but sitting here in Al-Quds, and I'm talking about the need for Palestinians to organize and for a political movement to really, this has to be a part of a political movement. It's just not going to happen because of it's not going to be resolved just because of the injustice. And, it sounds like I'm kind of downplaying the Israeli role. Because Osama is saying, "Hey, wait a minute! It's the Israelis that are attacking us. It's the Israelis that are committing genocide. It's the Israelis that are they are occupying and oppressing," which is all true. Why don't I emphasize that more? Because you're never going to get through to the Israelis. I think this is really, sometimes when we come up, I'm very involved with the One Democratic State campaign. The whole idea of having a vision of where we're going with all of this. And every time you bring up a thing, people ask, and including Palestinians, well, would the Israelis ever agree to this? Well, you can't have your liberation dependent upon whether the oppressors are going to agree or not. You have to create a situation which you bypass them, they're irrelevant, you cut them out, and you simply create a situation like was done in South Africa, where the apartheid regime there and here collapses, and then you move on. So I think what's happened here in Israel is the Israelis are more right-wing than they were on October 7th, especially the young generation. Netanyahu is going to be replaced. Everybody hates him, and not because of Gaza. Well, they hold him responsible for October 7th, but way beyond that as well. But you're going to get a government. The next prime minister is liable to be Gadi Eisenkot. Eisenkot was the general in Beirut that developed the Dakhia doctrine of absolute destruction of the neighborhood, the area of Beirut called Dakhia, and then that was applied to Gaza, and that was applied to Jenin and other parts of the West Bank as well. That's become official Israeli military doctrine. We don't differentiate between civilians and combatants, which violates the basic international principle of distinction, and we respond disproportionately. So what I'm trying to say is we have to, in a way, just forget about Israel. I mean, not forget the crimes, obviously, and keep that at the center and the suffering of the Palestinian. But in a political sense, the Israelis are not going to participate in any way. You do not have in any way a meaningful critical mass of critical Israelis. They're critical of the government, but not because of the Palestinian issue. 94% of the Israelis supported the genocide in Gaza. So I think we have to, in a weird sort of a way, plan the struggle in a way. Again, South Africa is a little bit of an inspiration for us. What you all did, and in a sense, what you did was to bypass the whites in South Africa and create I don't know if it was the ANC only, but the local South African movement against apartheid with the international community, and then that made the South African regime collapse. I'm being very simplistic. That's, I think, what has to be done here. We have to ignore Israel. Condemn it as much as possible, hold it accountable with BDS and international, all of that. But nevertheless, to say it's not going to be, Israel's not going to be a partner in any way to resolving this. They're always committed to Judaization and the takeover of Palestine. That's Zionism. And therefore, we have to take that into account and build a movement based on Palestinian rights, mobilizing the international community with the help of anti-Zionist Israeli Jews like me, the few that there are, and build a movement like that. So in many ways, I guess what I'm saying is I'm putting the emphasis on the Palestinian leadership, especially grassroots, and that's where the PA becomes a problem, rather than on Israeli culpability, because Israeli culpability is a given. We know that. And I think we simply can't rely on any kind of liberal forces inside Israel having any kind of real political impact here.
Well, Prof. Jeff, in fact, I will ask Osama to actually comment, because, you talk about Palestinian leadership at a grassroots level, and under the circumstances that prevail, is this really a possibility? Because we find most Palestinians are actually fighting for survival in more ways than one, and on humanitarian grounds as well. And I think, Osama, at this point in time, is there even any thinking or any thought process with regard to political leadership, considering that some of the leadership has been imprisoned, many of the leadership have been martyred as well. And, when one looks at Palestine, it's about the people, it's about the resilience of the people, it's about the sacrifices they've made. And this is what is actually keeping them going, and knowing that the end game, obviously, as Lina alluded to as well, that at some point in time, something has to give and victory will be theirs.
We need to understand that the Israeli occupation interferes with every bit and piece of the Palestinians' life. If you want to move from your village to the city, or from Jenin to Ramallah, for example, you can't do that without the permission from the Israeli occupation forces, who are manning the checkpoints and the Iron Gate. So the whole problem and the whole crisis lies with the Israeli occupation. If the Palestinians don't have the occupying power of Israel on their land, I think there would be no problem of the problems that we are facing today. With regard to the Palestinian Authority, despite all that is said, you know that Israel has been withholding the Palestinian tax revenues, preventing the Palestinian Authority from exercising even the basic task that it has, just like paying the salaries of its employees or doing whatever, as Israel is besieging it, and the Palestinian Authority is put under bigger pressure as the Israeli forces are invading into the area classified Area A, which is under the rule of the Palestinian Authority. So when it comes to the Palestinian Authority as a structure, Israel is refusing the existence of this structure, and it is leaving it like a bone without the flesh, undermining it completely. So I don't see that the Palestinian people problem lies with the PA leadership. The problem is the Israeli occupation. And of course, the Palestinians are preparing for legislative and the presidential election, and election also for the Palestinian National Council. And the people are going to have the opportunity to choose their leaders. But that is not the solution, really. The only solution that would enable the Palestinians to have normal life is the end of the Israeli occupation.
Shukran for that, Osama. And just finally, we are obviously running out of time, but Lina, I'd obviously just getting your thoughts again. And you obviously have always had, this positive outlook in terms of the outcome as far as the people of Palestine is concerned. And here we're discussing a milestone, we're discussing 1,000 days of the genocide, but there's just so much more to what we can actually talk about and we can unpack as well. And just looking at it from your perspective, just some of your thoughts in terms of where we are right now, and how do you see this actually going forward?
It's kind of difficult for me to be idealistic and have and to communicate all my dreams for a free Palestine when I'm standing in front of Osama Nazzal, who's facing the harsh realities of what it means to be under occupation. So I'm not going to sit here and share all of that. As an artist, as a poet, my mind tends to go to the positive, but their harsh reality that they're facing is that, for example, a 4-month-old Ahmed Zaid was died at a checkpoint trying to simply get medical assistance. This is their reality every day, that you might lose your son simply because the existence of this Israeli occupation prevents you from every facet of life. And so I'm not going to sit here and judge Palestinians within Palestine or say that they need to create leadership or that they need to do anything. I think really it's up to us in the Muslim and Arab world to have awakenings, to try to do with what freedoms that we do have compared to them, in order to put pressure on our governments, in order to put pressure and try to contribute to the alleviation of the suffering of Palestinians in their day-to-day life. You know my thoughts about this. You know that I do believe that a huge shift is going to come, and that, you know, such an oppressive regime has to have an ending, and it's not sustainable for Israel to continue as it is. And we've seen in the past year the blatant way in which they share their war crimes. You know, the way that they're not even trying to hide anymore the racism and the dehumanization of Palestinians that, you know, that's really embedded in their very culture. And it's not just a few bad apples, it's the entire society. And so that's not sustainable. And I do believe that, you know, something is going to change. I think it's just up to each and every one of us to see what we're going to contribute towards this path to liberation, and do whatever we can to alleviate the suffering of Palestinians. I have many friends in Gaza, and they feel like the world has forgotten about them. So it's so important for us to keep sharing, to keep speaking, to keep donating, to keep doing whatever that we can to just help them ride out, you know, the very worst of, you know, this 78 occupation and colonialism, to help them just survive a little bit more until that breaking point happens.
Well, Lina, and just very quickly before we end the broadcast, and interesting, you know, you made a comment with regard to the FIFA World Cup 2026 that is playing out. And, you know, while the world has been focused on FIFA, you know, we look at the number of Palestinian sports people that have been killed. And while this World Cup was underway, a prominent Palestinian footballer, was martyred as well. And yet, you know, the world seemed to forget because they caught in this hype. And interesting that, you know, you speak about the corruption, and we've also seen what has happened with Egypt. The coach of Egypt, who had displayed the Palestinian flag, he's made, in his press conference, he's made comments regarding how he feels about the Palestinian children and the people of Palestine. So Palestine has been very much a part of this World Cup, although, you know, we haven't seen open displays of protests and the like as well. But we've seen this agenda playing out, even FIFA. We've also heard about countries like Argentina, their close association with Israel, one of the world's best players, Lionel Messi, his association with Israel, and why Egypt had lost. So Palestine will never ever be on a back burner, even though you have a spectacle like the World Cup playing out.
Yeah, for me, I think both things can be true, that we can support Palestine and Gaza, and we can also appreciate that there were some positive moments in the FIFA World Cup. There will always be distractions. But for me, the moment where Coach Hussam Hassan lifted that Palestinian flag and destroyed the narrative that Egypt has completely normalized with Israel, and that they are two neighboring countries and there's peace and love between the two people, he completely shattered that illusion. And I think what colonialist regimes really thrive on is division. And what the World Cup, seeing the Bosnian teams chanting for Palestine, seeing the Moroccan players, doing the sujood for God, seeing the Egyptian team, stand for Palestine, all of these things shatter the narratives that we are disconnected, that the Arab people have forgotten about Palestine. And I think Professor Jeff Halper can speak to how much this resonated with Israeli society, this one action of the Egyptian coach holding the Palestinian flag, and how much it really triggered them. And so for me, we can see the positives. We can remind people Palestinians are still dying. Let's not get distracted. But at the same time, use any global affair in order to redirect to Palestine. So I thought there were positives that came out of this FIFA World Cup.
Well, shukran for that, Lina, and also to you, Osama Nazzal, Prof. Jeff Halper, Lina Abojarade. We thank you. We do appreciate your time with us right here on Salam Media. Unfortunately, time is of the essence. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you for having us.
Goodbye. Thank you.
Well, that brings us to the end of tonight's edition of In Conversation with myself, Inayat Wali. Two very, very different but very robust discussions that we have had with our panelists this evening, and inshallah, looking forward to more of these type of discussions right here on Salam Media. So, but for now, from myself and the team, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.